Hi, I'm Tamsin. Last night, at my sister's extravagant birthday party, I was dragged onto a stage in front of 200 guests to perform ballet, like a circus act they could laugh at. And they did. My own family, smiling, clapping, recording it as if humiliation were entertainment. They called it fun. They called it tradition. But while they laughed, they had no idea who was about to walk through those doors. They thought I was still the girl they could mock into silence, but they were wrong. Tell me, have you ever been the quiet one in your family, until the moment your silence became their biggest mistake? I pulled up to the Fenwick estate just as the last of the sunlight brushed the tops of the trees. The house glowed like it had been dipped in gold, 3 stories of windows, strings of lights wrapped around the columns, and valet attendants who smiled at everyone like they were paid to love them. My little sedan looked like a mistake among the black Range Rovers and Mercedes lined up outside. I stayed in the driver's seat for a few seconds, gripping the steering wheel until my palms felt damp. When I finally stepped out, the breeze bit through the thin fabric of my dress. I'd chosen something simple, navy blue, the kind of thing you wear when you don't want to give anyone a reason to talk about you. Inside the foyer, a doorman in a crisp white shirt took my invitation and glanced down at it. His brows lifted slightly, a tiny hesitation before he smiled and handed it back. "You're with the stage team, right?" My stomach tightened. "No," I said, my voice even. "I'm family." He blinked, looked at the card again, and pointed to a small label printed at the bottom. It read, "Stage Assistant, Emily V." There was that name again. Emily. The one they used when they couldn't be bothered to remember mine. I thanked him quietly and walked past before the confusion turned into pity. The ballroom smelled like lilies and expensive champagne. Chandeliers threw diamonds of light across the walls, and the sound of soft jazz carried over the low hum of conversation. I stood there for a moment, letting the noise blur, watching waiters glide between tables with trays of hors d'oeuvres. My sister's voice rose above the rest, sweet and sharp, like glass catching light. Isolde always had perfect timing. I moved toward the seating chart near the entrance, scanning for my name. The list was alphabetical, neat, precise. I looked under V. Nothing. I looked again. Nothing. An usher in a dark suit noticed me lingering. "Can I help you find your table?" "I think there might have been a mistake," I said. He checked the clipboard, flipped through a few pages, then smiled. "You're at table 19. Back near the corridor. Right this way." The corridor, I realized, was next to the restrooms. When I reached the table, it was half hidden behind a dessert cart. A folded name tent sat there, Eve Monroe, staff. The question mark wasn't printed, someone had added it in pen. Across the room, my sister glowed in a silver gown, laughing with reporters. Cameras flashed, and people leaned toward her like flowers bending toward the sun. I remembered when we were kids, sharing a room so small our beds nearly touched. She used to whisper that she'd build a bigger one someday. She did. And there was never room for me in it. I sat down quietly, smoothing my dress. The chair wobbled slightly against the tiled floor. Around me, people filled the air with talk about investments, vacations, the right kind of olive oil. No one looked my way. I reached for the water glass in front of me, took a sip, and tried to pretend the isolation didn't sting. For a while, I let my mind wander, to the family dinners where my chair was always closest to the kitchen, to the Christmas card where my face had been cropped by the border of a printed snowflake. At every celebration, I was the placeholder. The extra. A burst of laughter erupted from the main table. I looked up just in time to see Isolde toss her hair back, the photographer capturing her at the perfect angle. I'd once believed she didn't mean to leave me out. That belief had kept me soft for years. A young server stopped beside my table, balancing a tray of drinks. He hesitated, studying my face. "You're with the staff, right?" I smiled, small, polite. "No. Just family." Color rushed to his cheeks. "Oh, I'm sorry, ma'am. I didn't." "It's fine," I interrupted gently. "You're not the first to make that mistake tonight." He nodded awkwardly and walked off. His apology lingered in the air like perfume I didn't want to breathe in. The jazz band changed tempo. A new song started, something louder, livelier. Waiters lit candles in crystal holders, and the chandeliers dimmed to a golden haze. I watched the light play across the champagne glasses. From where I sat, the party looked like a painting I wasn't supposed to touch. I opened my phone, the screen lighting my face in the dimness. My fingers hovered over the Notes app. At my sister's birthday, I am once again invisible. Not forgotten. Just misplaced on purpose. I stared at the sentence. It wasn't angry, it was simply true. Across the room, Isolde turned in my direction. Our eyes met for one sharp second. She tilted her head, that practiced smile spreading across her face, the kind that said, "I know exactly where you are." Then she turned away, already mid-laugh with someone else. I closed the phone, set it down, and rested my hands on my lap. The music swelled, glasses clinked, and for the first time that night, I felt something steady rise beneath the hurt, a calm kind of certainty. I whispered under my breath, too soft for anyone to hear. "You're going to remember this night." The clinking of silverware against crystal pulled me back from my thoughts. Dinner was being served, and laughter rippled through the room in soft waves. I hadn't moved since the start of the evening. I stayed in the shadows, watching from the edge of the ballroom as waiters refilled glasses and photographers circled the tables like patient hunters. My stomach felt tight, but I forced myself to breathe evenly. The smell of roasted lamb, butter, and perfume mixed into something dizzying. A waiter approached, carrying a tray of wine glasses. He smiled politely and held one out to me. "White or red?" he asked. But before I could answer, he looked down at the name 10 in front of me. "That still read E. Monroe, staff?" His hand froze. "Oh, sorry," he murmured quickly, pulling the glass back as if I'd asked for it under false pretenses. "It's fine," I said quietly. He nodded and hurried away. The microphone screeched slightly, and the crowd hushed. Isolde was walking to the stage, glittering in her silver gown. The light seemed made for her. She adjusted the mic and smiled, scanning the room. "Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. I can't believe I'm 40, she said, drawing laughter from the guests. Her voice slid through the air, smooth, practiced, and just loud enough to sound sincere. My shoulders stiffened. I knew that tone. It meant she was about to perform. "I thought," she continued, "we could take a walk down memory lane." The lights dimmed. A screen descended from the ceiling, and soft music began to play. I expected a slideshow of her brand campaigns, maybe pictures from her charity events. But then the first image appeared, a grainy video clip. The living room of our old house. Faded carpet. A little girl, barefoot, spinning in a pink tutu. My heart thudded against my ribs. I was 7. I watched my younger self rise on tiptoe, arms lifted in what I thought was grace. The audience let out a collective awe, and for a second, I thought maybe this was her way of including me. But then the music changed. A honking, circus-like tune replaced the piano melody. The video zoomed in on my fall, slowed down, repeated twice. Laughter erupted. Someone near me whispered, "That's adorable." Another voice chuckled, she was quite the entertainer. I felt my face heat. The title appeared across the screen, Tamsin, the prima clownerina. My pulse pounded in my ears. I couldn't move. I wanted to stand, to walk out, but my legs were heavy, glued to the floor by the weight of 100 amused faces. Isolde laughed from the stage. "Oh, come on, it's funny," she said, waving her hand. "You have to admit, she's always been our family comedian." The room roared with laughter. My hand tightened around the stem of my glass until I thought it might crack. I stared at the screen again. I could still remember that day, the smell of lemon polish on the floor, the sound of my grandmother's voice telling me to keep twirling, that the world always needs more beauty. Those ballet slippers had been her last gift before she passed. And now they were background props for a joke. The video ended. Applause followed, light and polite. I wanted to sink into the chair and vanish. Isolde took the mic again, her voice syrupy sweet. Tamsin has always had this gift, she said. She makes things lighter. Even when life got tough, she'd trip, spill something, say something silly, and suddenly, everyone was smiling again. We needed that. The crowd laughed. My mother dabbed the corner of her eye with a napkin, whispering something to the guest beside her. Here's to Tamsin, Isolde said, raising her glass. Our family's little gesture. The room clapped. All eyes turned to me. Every instinct screamed to get up and leave, but instead, I smiled. Just a small curve of my mouth. The kind of smile you give when there's no other weapon left. I raised my own glass, pretending to toast along. My vision blurred for a second, but I refused to blink. Flashes burst from camera phones. I sat there, perfectly still, until the sound of the next song filled the silence. Then, quietly, I stood. No one noticed. I walked out of the ballroom, through the side doors that led to the garden. The night air hit me like a slap, sharp, real. I walked until I reached the fountain at the edge of the property, its surface glimmering under the moonlight. The muffled laughter from inside the house echoed faintly through the glass doors. I pulled out my phone, opened my notes, and typed, "Humiliation is the family language." And I'm finally fluent. The screen glowed in my hand, the letters clear and deliberate. I locked the phone and slipped it into my bag. For a long moment, I just stood there, watching my reflection ripple in the water. Behind me, the music continued, Isolde's laughter carried into the night, effortless and bright. I need to remember this, I whispered, the words leaving a taste of metal in my mouth. All of it. The air outside was cooler now, the night deepening into that quiet hour when the laughter from inside the mansion sounded distant, almost hollow. I stayed near the fountain, the soft trickle of water the only steady rhythm against the chaos in my chest. My reflection trembled on the surface, half light, half shadow. Somewhere behind me, the band started another upbeat tune. It felt cruel, how easily people could keep celebrating when someone else had just been turned into a joke. I let my fingertips glide through the water, cold and grounding. The sensation brought me back to myself, back from that place where humiliation burns and memory presses too hard. My therapist once told me, when they laugh at your truth, they're showing you their own fear. I didn't understand it then, but I did tonight. The laughter wasn't about me. It was about them, people who needed someone smaller to feel big. I took a slow breath and looked toward the glowing windows of the ballroom. Through the glass, I could see my sister smiling for a photographer, tilting her head the way she always did when she wanted to look gracious. I felt the old ache stir again, the one that lived under every accomplishment I'd buried. I used to dance through pain. Literally. The memory came uninvited, a studio with mirrors stretching from floor to ceiling, the faint scent of rosin and sweat. I was 17, rehearsing for my audition to Juilliard. Every turn, every pointed toe felt like a heartbeat. For the first time, I believed my future could belong to me alone. Then the door slammed open. Isolde stood there, mascara streaked, holding a crumpled letter. They rejected me, she sobbed. Columbia rejected me. Our mother rushed in behind her, gathering her into her arms. Oh, sweetheart, it's okay. You'll find another way. My father's voice joined hers, soothing, proud. All three of them stood in the doorway, the kind of family portrait I was never part of. When they finally noticed me, still standing in front of the mirror, my mother sighed. Tamsin, honey, maybe take a break today. Your sister's upset. She needs us right now. I nodded, because what else could I do? I took off my slippers, sat on the floor, and watched the reflection of their comforting shapes fade down the hall. That was the day I stopped dancing with hope. The next morning, I didn't send my audition tape. I told my teacher I'd changed my mind. She looked at me like she could see the truth, but she didn't push. Within a week, I boxed up my costumes and stored them in the attic. My parents didn't mention it. Isolde didn't either. It was as if my passion had never existed. A door creaked open somewhere behind me, pulling me back to the present. The music from the ballroom shifted to something softer. Dinner had ended. I straightened my posture, brushing the wrinkles from my dress. I couldn't hide outside forever. If there was one thing my family valued more than appearances, it was pretending nothing ever happened. When I stepped back inside, the air was thick with perfume and the sugar scent of dessert. The clatter of plates and polite laughter filled the gaps between songs. I slipped past the waitstaff, keeping close to the walls. My goal was simple: stay invisible, stay calm. Near the main table, Isolde stood surrounded by 2 local reporters. One of them held a microphone, smiling. "You've inspired so many, Isolde," he said. "Your story's incredible. Have you always been drawn to the arts?" Isolde's laugh was airy. "Oh, ballet. I dabbled in it when I was younger. My little sister became obsessed after watching me." The words cut deeper than I expected. I froze mid-step. The lie was effortless, smooth, and practiced. My sister's voice carried across the room, light enough to pass as harmless truth. The reporter nodded. "So you were her inspiration?" She smiled. "I always thought she danced to be like me." The slideshow on the screen behind her flickered again. Pictures of Isolde through the years, birthdays, charity galas, vacations. Then one appeared, her wearing a ballerina costume, plastic tiara, the caption reading the original star. The audience chuckled. I could almost feel my past being erased in real time. I moved closer to the wall, steadying myself. My heart wasn't racing anymore, it was too tired for that. I stood there, listening, as applause followed her every sentence. She'd stolen my narrative, rewritten it like she always had, until even I began to question whether my memories were real. That Halloween costume, pink tulle and glitter, had been borrowed from me. I'd lent it to her because she'd wanted to match me for fun. She'd twirled once in front of the mirror, then declared herself the better ballerina. I'd laughed then. Foolishly. Now it was part of her legend. The sound in the room dimmed, and my mind drifted again to another memory, the day the scholarship letter arrived. My dance instructor had written a personal recommendation, one that described me as the most disciplined student in 15 years. I'd shown it to my father at the breakfast table, expecting pride. He'd smiled briefly before folding the letter. "This is wonderful, Tam, but maybe keep it quiet for a bit. Your sister's had a rough week. We don't want to upset her." So I'd hidden my joy, just like he asked. I kept the letter folded in my pocket until the ink smudged. The more I thought about it, the clearer the pattern became. Every milestone, every small victory of mine had been neatly packed away so Isolde could keep her reflection untarnished. I was the silence that made her shine. The crowd's laughter pulled me back. Isolde was finishing her interview, thanking everyone for their endless support. The microphone glimmered in her hand like a scepter. She looked completely in control, untouchable. I touched the small clutch at my side and opened it. Inside was a worn photograph, edges soft from years of handling. Me, age 16, backstage in my first solo recital. My costume shimmered faintly under the theater lights, my smile unguarded. I'd almost forgotten that version of myself, the girl who didn't need permission to take up space. I held the photo in my palm, closing my fingers around it until the edges pressed into my skin. My breath came slower, deeper. "They can steal the spotlight," I whispered to myself, "but not the story." The room hummed with low laughter and the clinking of silverware. The lights had softened to a honey glow, and the scent of champagne hung heavy in the air. I just slipped my phone back into my clutch, still thinking about the picture folded inside, when I heard my name. Or rather, the version of it that always made me feel smaller. "Tammy." "Don't hide all night," a cousin called from across the room, his voice too loud, too cheerful. I looked up and saw him weaving between tables, grinning like a schoolboy who'd found trouble. "They're doing something special. You'll love it." My stomach tightened. I'd heard that tone before, the prelude to a joke everyone was in on but me. I started to shake my head, but before I could respond, the host's voice boomed through the speakers. For a bit of fun tonight, he said, smiling toward the audience, we've got someone in the crowd who knows how to pirouette. A few heads turned my way. Oh no. Come on up, Tamsin. The spotlight hit me like a slap of heat. The air around me seemed to thin. People started clapping, the rhythm playful but sharp, like a chant disguised as encouragement. Do it. Do it, someone yelled from the back. I raised my hand slightly. No, thank you, I said, trying to keep my voice light. I'm not really dressed for. But then I saw her. Isolde, standing at the edge of the dance floor, a microphone in hand, smiling wide enough for the cameras. Come on, Tam, she cooed. You used to live for this stuff. Don't tell me you've gotten shy. The crowd laughed, the kind of laughter that comes when cruelty is sugar-coated with charm. I think we'd all love to see it, she added, tilting her head, her tone just this side of teasing. The pressure around me grew like static. Someone touched my elbow gently but firmly, another cousin, maybe, and before I knew it, I was on my feet. The sound of applause followed, thick and echoing. I felt my legs moving, though my mind screamed to stay seated. The stage smelled faintly of wax and champagne. A man handed me a small box, his grin uncertain. We found this in your mom's attic, he said, chuckling. Recognize it? Inside was a tutu, pink, wrinkled, the elastic frayed. My breath caught. It was mine. I hadn't seen it since I was 17. Someone must have dug it up like an artifact. This is cruel, I whispered, but no one heard me. Try it on, a woman shouted. Another voice followed, at least the skirt still fits. The laughter rippled again, light and poisonous. I didn't move. A younger relative handed me a pair of scuffed ballet flats. Here, she said, smirking. We thought we'd make it authentic. I stared at her hand, then at the shoes. For a moment, I thought about walking off. But something in me shifted, a stillness, a calm that wasn't surrender but focus. Fine, I thought. If they want a show, I'll give them one. I slipped on the flats. The music started, a remixed, carnival-like version of Swan Lake. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. I stepped under the spotlight. The floorboards felt slick beneath my feet. I bent my knees slightly, raised my arms, and performed a single ply. The crowd clapped, half mocking, half expecting more. Atta girl, someone called out. Then my heel caught on the hem of my dress. I stumbled, just slightly. The room gasped, then burst into laughter. Someone's phone flashed, someone else's camera recorded. Careful, a voice called from the back. Don't break a hip. My cheeks burned. I straightened, breathing through my nose, keeping my chin high. I looked across the sea of faces, so many familiar strangers. My parents sat near the front, smiling, clapping along. My mother whispered something to my father, who nodded, amused. And Isolde. She winked. That tiny, smug wink snapped something inside me. Without thinking, I lifted my arms again and turned once, slow, deliberate, precise. An arabesque. My leg extended perfectly, toes pointed, balance held. The laughter faltered. The music still played its grotesque parody, but I no longer heard it. I moved through the air like I used to, graceful and strong. Then I stopped. Just one move. That was all they would get. The applause came after a heartbeat of silence. Scattered, unsure. Were they mocking me again, or admiring me? I didn't care anymore. I bowed, not as a clown, but as a performer reclaiming her own stage. Then I walked off without another glance at them. The lights dimmed behind me. The laughter returned, faint, like an echo from another lifetime. When I reached my table, I noticed my chair was gone. Just an empty space, as if I'd never sat there at all. For a second, I almost laughed at the irony. Even my seat had been erased. They want a clown, I murmured to myself. I gave them a queen, for just 1 second. I stood there in the half-dark, my shoes pinching, my throat tight but dry. The music shifted again, another upbeat song, another excuse for celebration. Somewhere behind me, Isolde's voice rose above the noise, charming as ever. Wasn't she adorable? It's so nice to see her in the spotlight again. The crowd laughed, softer now, but still cruel. I didn't turn around. I walked toward the hallway instead, the marble floor cool beneath my feet. Each step felt heavier than the last, but my back stayed straight. By the time I reached the doorway, the laughter had already faded into something else, distant, irrelevant. I didn't look back. I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty space where my chair had been, like someone had swept it away with the same casual disregard that had followed me all night. Around me, the chatter returned to its usual hum, the crowd blissfully unaware or willfully indifferent. I didn't cause a scene. That wasn't my style. I simply stood, clasping my clutch tightly against my side, pretending not to notice. The effort it took to keep my shoulders relaxed, to not let my face betray the sting, I felt it in my teeth. Eventually, a young waiter with nervous eyes noticed me hovering. He looked around, clearly unsure what to do, then whispered something to a colleague. A minute later, he returned carrying a folding chair, gray metal, the kind you'd find in church basements or cheap banquet halls. He placed it behind one of the columns near the edge of the ballroom. "Here you go, ma'am," he said, eyes lowered. I thanked him softly and sat down in that forgotten corner. From there, I could see the main table where my family gathered, well lit, festive, full of chatter and wine. It felt like a stage, and I was the audience they never invited. The band slowed to a graceful instrumental, and someone tapped on a glass with a spoon. My father rose from his seat, a wine glass in one hand, the other smoothing the front of his blazer. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "as this beautiful evening begins to wind down, I just want to say a few words about legacy and family." He paused for effect. That was his favorite thing, pausing just long enough to command attention without looking like he needed it. I look around this room and I see strength. I see perseverance. And most of all, I see women who shine. There were a few polite claps. My mother gave a small nod, beaming. He turned slightly toward Isolde. "To my daughter Isolde, what you've built, what you've achieved, is nothing short of extraordinary." The crowd clapped louder now, and Isolde gave her signature smile, half proud, half humble. "And of course," he continued, glancing across the room, "to Melissa." A cough echoed from somewhere. A few people shifted in their chairs. I mean," he said, waving his hand like brushing off a typo, "Tamsin." Laughter trickled through the room, gentle, amused, dismissive. I didn't laugh. I didn't flinch. But something inside me curled up and went still. The speech carried on, full of flowery praise for Isolde's grace, resilience, and natural leadership. My name wasn't mentioned again. Not that it had really been mentioned in the first place. I scanned the table. My mother sipped her wine, eyes cast down. She didn't correct him. She never did. Isolde leaned into his side, laughing softly. Someone snapped a photo. It would look like a moment of shared admiration. It would be posted online, captioned with something like, "Father and daughter, unstoppable duo." I sat in my metal chair behind a pillar, the only one facing the wall. I could feel eyes glancing at me. No one held the gaze. A few seconds of discomfort, and they moved on. But one man sitting nearby, someone I didn't recognize, leaned closer and said quietly, "Your dad totally forgot your name." I turned my head just enough to meet his eyes. "He's been forgetting it for years," I replied. He blinked, unsure if it was a joke or a confession. Then he looked away. My hand moved to my phone. I opened the Notes app, the screen's glow soft against my lap. I typed, "They've mistaken my silence for consent." My thumbs hovered for a moment. Then I added, "Not anymore." I stood. I wasn't walking out to cry. I wasn't escaping. I was making space, physically, emotionally, deliberately. As I walked across the room, I passed by a table of cousins. One of them leaned in toward another, whispering something with a smirk. I didn't stop. I didn't ask. I didn't need to know the words. I already knew the flavor of them. When I reached the hallway just outside the ballroom, the lights behind me dimmed. I could hear the MC calling everyone to attention again for one final tribute to the birthday queen. I didn't pause. My heels clicked softly on the marble floor as I moved toward the restroom corridor, not out of need, but for quiet. For space. There was something in my chest, tight, burning, but not grief. Not anymore. It was resolve. Cold and clear. The hallway was quiet except for the faint hum of the band drifting through the closed doors. I stood for a moment, adjusting to the silence after so much noise. The marble under my heels felt cold, grounding. My hands were still trembling slightly, though not from sadness, more from a strange kind of clarity settling over me like a fine layer of frost. I leaned against one of the pillars near the entryway, trying to collect myself. The sounds of laughter echoed faintly from inside, my sister's voice, light and confident, floating above the rest. I could picture her perfectly, smile practiced, posture flawless, that same tilt of her chin she'd learned from watching our mother at charity galas. Miss Fenwick. I turned, startled by the soft voice behind me. A young man in a catering uniform stood there, hands clasped nervously. His name tag read Devon. Yes? I asked, keeping my tone gentle. He hesitated, glancing toward the ballroom doors before speaking. I'm sorry to bother you, ma'am. I overheard something earlier tonight. I thought you should know. My first instinct was to wave it off. I'd spent a lifetime hearing and pretending not to hear. But something in his face, an earnestness, maybe guilt, made me nod. Go on. He swallowed hard. I was near the service corridor when Miss Fenwick's assistant was talking to the photography team. They were joking about the seating plan. One of them said, make sure the cameras avoid the dead weight. The family burden is allergic to relevance. I stared at him, the words hitting harder than I expected. The family burden. He shifted awkwardly. They weren't whispering, ma'am. It wasn't just a joke. They meant it. I wanted to say something clever, something that would make him feel less uncomfortable. Instead, I just nodded once. Thank you for telling me. He hesitated again, then added softly, you didn't deserve that. And then he was gone, hurrying down the hallway with his tray. I stayed still. The air felt thicker now, as if the walls themselves had absorbed those words and were holding them up for me to examine. Family burden. I repeated it silently. It wasn't new, it was just finally spoken aloud. When I began to walk again, my heels clicked against the floor with a rhythm that felt deliberate, steady. I followed the sound of muffled laughter until I reached a long table near the back of the foyer. Stacked neatly on it were small, elegant boxes wrapped in ivory paper, each with a golden tag, a gift from Isolde. Thank you for being part of the story. The story. Hers, of course. Always hers. I watched as guests stopped by to pick one up, smiling as volunteers handed them out. When I reached the table, the young woman managing it smiled politely. May I have your name, please? Tamsin Virelli. Her eyes darted down to the list in front of her. I watched her finger trace down the rows once, twice. Then her smile faltered. I'm so sorry, she murmured, flipping a page. I don't see it here. Maybe it's under Fenwick. It won't be, I said quietly. She looked up, cheeks pink. You must not be part of the curated circle. The words slipped out before she could catch them. She froze, realizing what she'd said. I didn't mean. It's all right. My voice came out calm, almost detached. You didn't make the list. I turned and walked away. My eyes were dry. There was no point wasting tears on something so predictable. As I moved further from the light and chatter, the sound of my own breathing grew louder. I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app again. For a second, the empty screen looked almost peaceful. Then I started typing. My name is not an afterthought. Pause. Delete. Type again. My life is not a footnote. I am done being their anecdote. I stared at the words until they stopped blurring. Then I copied the text and opened a new email. The subject line appeared on the screen like a headline I was finally ready to write: Inheritance of Silence. I began typing names: my attorney, the one I'd worked with quietly over the last year. It wasn't about suing anyone, it was about archiving. Protecting myself. Making sure my version of the story couldn't be rewritten again. I attached photos, old letters, receipts, that scholarship document my father had hidden. Each upload felt like reclaiming something I'd lost piece by piece. When I hit send, my hands didn't shake. There was no satisfaction, no revenge, just a quiet kind of freedom that settled deep inside my chest. I glanced back toward the ballroom. Through the glass doors, I could see the glow of chandeliers, the crowd gathered closer together now. Someone was speaking on the mic, probably the final toast. The music softened into something sentimental. My sister's silhouette stood at the center, basking in applause. I smoothed my dress, squared my shoulders, and pushed the door open. The room smelled like roses and sugar. Faces turned briefly, then away again, as if I were part of the decor, nothing more. But this time, I didn't shrink from it. I walked with measured steps, the sound of my heels steady against the polished floor. There was no seat waiting for me. So I stood. From my corner of the room, I could see Isolde on stage, thanking the guests for their loyalty and love. She was radiant, untouchable, the golden daughter to the end. But as I watched her speak, I realized something had shifted, not in her, but in me. She could have her stage, her applause, her story written in glitter and glass. Mine was written in steel. I stood at the edge of the ballroom, barely a foot past the door I'd come through only minutes earlier. The air inside felt thicker now, heavier with expectation. As the lights dimmed and a hush rolled over the crowd like an expensive blanket, I took a step forward, just enough to be seen, not enough to be mistaken as part of the act. On stage, Isolde stood next to a massive screen, her champagne flute catching the spotlight. She looked radiant, untouched by exhaustion, as though every cruel move tonight had only added to her glow. She cleared her throat and smiled, that controlled, camera-ready smile. Tonight, she began, is about legacy. The screen behind her flickered to life, revealing a black and white photo, our childhood home in flames. Gasps rippled through the audience. She took a sip of her drink before continuing. I remember standing in the driveway that night, watching 20 years of memories go up in smoke. Our family lost everything. Another photo, the house, half rebuilt. Still raw, scaffolding visible. But we rose from ashes, Isolde said. And it was my dream, my vision, and yes, my money, that brought our family home back to life. The applause was immediate, enthusiastic. Heads nodded around the room. A few guests whispered things like, "She really did it all," and "What a woman." I didn't blink. I didn't move. But my jaw tightened just enough for my molars to press. Because I remembered that night too. But not from the curb, not from behind the lens of a dramatic retelling. I remembered it from the bank account I drained without telling anyone. From the check I wrote to cover the construction deposit when our parents were too paralyzed by the insurance delay to act. From the accountant's advice, if you put it under her name, it'll avoid complications. Keep it simple. I remembered. But she had rewritten it. Just like the ballet story. Just like everything. No one else wanted to deal with the paperwork, she said now, eyes shimmering. The permits. The negotiations. I did it alone. More applause. Some people stood. My hand tightened around the stem of my glass, not enough to break it, but close. I leaned slightly forward, whispered under my breath, "That's not just theft. That's identity murder." The words weren't for anyone else. Just me. Just truth. My mother, seated near the stage, dabbed at her eyes with a linen napkin. My father held his wine to the light like he was examining the legacy he'd left behind in her hands. It hit me then, how convenient I'd made it for them to forget me. How I'd erased myself over time, made silence look like support. But not anymore. I placed my glass down on the edge of a side table. With both hands free, I smoothed my dress, adjusted the strap that kept sliding off my shoulder, and walked forward. Not fast. Not dramatic. Just forward. The guests noticed me one by one, like a ripple. Conversations paused mid-sentence. A few people smiled awkwardly, unsure whether I was meant to be part of this closing act. My mother's face stiffened. She reached out slightly as if to stop me. "Don't ruin this, honey," she mouthed. I didn't acknowledge her. I just kept walking until I stood at the very front, off to the side of the stage, in plain view of every guest, every lens, every whisper. I didn't say a word. But Isolde saw me. And for the first time that night, her voice caught. Her eyes flicked toward me. Her smile dimmed, not vanished, just hesitated. She turned back to the crowd. "Our family has always depended on strength. On leadership," she continued, louder now, trying to recover. "And I've been proud to hold us together." I met her eyes and mouthed slowly, clearly, "You didn't hold us together. You held us hostage." Something shifted. There was a silence that didn't feel like reverence, but reckoning. Someone in the crowd whispered, not quietly enough, "Didn't her sister pay for the rebuild?" A pause. Cameras turned. Phones lifted. Another voice, "Wasn't it Tamsin's account?" Isolde's PR manager, seated 3 rows back, leaned forward like a man watching his career flash before his eyes. Isolde stammered for a moment, then laughed. It was brittle, forced. "Well, we all did our part, of course. But no one was really listening anymore. The story had cracked. And I didn't have to say a word. I simply stood there, letting silence do what years of explanations never could. The hush hadn't even finished rippling through the room when the doors swung open. Not flung, not slammed, just a smooth, deliberate motion, as if the moment had been waiting for its cue. Heads turned, shoulders straightened. Somewhere near the front, a wine glass clinked sharply against a plate and rolled onto the floor. It didn't shatter. Just spun in place, catching the light. I didn't turn toward the entrance. I didn't have to. I felt the shift in the air before I heard his steps. Measured. Steady. No rush. No hesitation. Alaric Monroe. He wasn't the kind of man who needed introduction, even if half the people in the room had never met him. They'd seen his face in magazines, his name in tech journals, his silhouette next to CEOs and presidents. He was the kind of quiet powerful that made people instinctively step aside when he entered a room. And they did, one by one, without a word. Cameras went up instantly. Someone gasped, loud enough to break the spell. "Is that Alaric Monroe?" A ripple of murmurs spread like wildfire. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit, perfectly fitted, the kind that didn't beg for attention but commanded it anyway. No tie. Just confidence and purpose. His eyes swept the room once, calmly. Then he walked past the glittering crowd without pause, heading directly toward me. For a second, I panicked, not because I didn't want him there, but because I didn't expect him now. Not like this. But the moment he reached me, everything calmed. He leaned down and kissed me on the temple. Soft. Simple. Then he turned to the crowd. His voice wasn't raised, but it cut through the room like a cold knife sliding across silk. "This," he said, placing a hand lightly on my shoulder, "is my wife." Gasps. Audible now. A few people stepped back, almost physically reacting to the collision between perception and truth. He let the pause linger. "The woman whose story you've been trying to erase." The silence that followed was almost too large to fit in the room. Isolde's face froze in a perfect expression of controlled confusion. The kind of look you wear when you know the cameras are still rolling and the room isn't entirely yours anymore. Alaric continued. Still calm. Still composed. She rebuilt this house. She paid your debts. She protected your reputation. And tonight, you repaid her by reducing her to entertainment. Someone dropped a fork. The crowd wasn't breathing. He turned slightly, addressing the room without raising his tone. I represent Aeon Tech Capital. And as of this moment, we are pulling all support, financial, promotional, and strategic, from Isolde Fenwick's brand. Isolde didn't blink, but her hand twitched around her glass. The ripple of reaction this time wasn't subtle. A stylish 2 rows back grabbed her phone. A fashion blogger near the bar started whispering rapidly into her earpiece. A man from the city council stiffened, already calculating the fallout. Alaric finished with 4 words. That ends. Right now. He stepped back. I hadn't said a thing. I didn't need to. Isolde tried to recover. She turned toward her mother, then back to the crowd. Let's not make this dramatic, she said, trying to inject levity into her voice, but it cracked at the edge. Alaric has a strong sense of timing. Laughter didn't follow. One guest whispered loudly, I thought she was the lucky sister. Another replied, apparently, she's just the loudest. I watched my sister's knees subtly shift, like her body had just realized what her mind hadn't caught up to yet. She took a step back, and for the first time in my life, I saw something I didn't recognize in her face. Not anger. Not embarrassment. But fear. Our mother stood frozen, her eyes darting between us. She wasn't used to the world tilting in a direction she hadn't predicted. My father, he had vanished to the edge of the room. Typical. I stepped forward, just slightly, enough for my shadow to touch the edge of Isolde's shoes. She looked at me like I'd set fire to her birthday cake. And still, I said nothing. I didn't need applause. I didn't need revenge. I just needed her to see me. And she did. Not as the sister who cleaned up after everyone's messes. Not as the family burden. Not as the joke. But as the one person in that room who had nothing to lose, and nothing to prove. And then, I turned. I walked out of the spotlight. And this time, they followed me with their eyes. Not her. Are you ready to dance? I asked them, my voice steady. They nodded. And so we began. I didn't tell them about the ballroom. Or the spotlight. Or the stolen credits. I just moved with them. And in that moment, I knew, I didn't burn the bridge. I just chose not to walk back across it. Morning settled over the house like a soft blanket, the kind that doesn't demand you get out of bed, but gently invites you to rise. The sunlight filtered through gauzy curtains, painting strips of gold across the hardwood floors of the kitchen. I stood barefoot by the sink, holding a mug I hadn't yet sipped from, the steam curling into the stillness. Alaric stood by the stove, pouring hot water into a teapot. He didn't say anything, and neither did I. We didn't need to. The silence between us wasn't heavy, not like the silences I'd grown up around. It was peace, unspoken and mutual. My phone sat face down on the counter. I hadn't checked it since the night before. I didn't want to. I didn't need to see the fallout, the headlines, the comments. I already knew the story had changed. This time, it had been written in a room full of witnesses. A room that had finally turned toward me instead of away. I set the mug down and opened the drawer by the fridge, the one where I kept the things I didn't want to forget. Tucked beneath an old ballet program and a cracked photo frame was a yellowing envelope, the paper soft with age. I unfolded it slowly, careful not to tear it. Inside was the card from the woman who raised me when my own mother had checked out emotionally. Her name was Carla. She'd been my foster mother for 3 years during my teens, before I was sent back home. But in that short time, she'd done what no one else had, she'd seen me. Her handwriting looped carefully across the paper, the ink faded but still legible. You were always the heart, even when they didn't know where to place you. That sentence had lived inside me for years like a lifeline. But reading it now, after everything that had unfolded, it felt less like a lifeline and more like a mirror. A reflection of the truth I had long buried under duty and decorum. I sat down at the kitchen table, holding the card in both hands. The tears came, not in a sob, not in a breakdown, but in slow, quiet drops that landed on the wood grain. They weren't for the family I'd lost. They were for the girl I used to be. The one who kept asking for room to exist, and finally realized she didn't have to ask anymore. Despite everything that had played out in front of 100 eyes, the echoes still lingered, the wrong name from my father, the wink from my sister, the silence from my mother. Those weren't wounds you healed with a single speech or a viral clip. They were deeper. Older. And yet, something had shifted. I stood up and walked into the room off the kitchen, the one with the upright piano and the floor worn smooth from years of quiet movement. It used to be the space where I taught children to dance when I couldn't afford a studio. Now it was going to be the beginning of something new. I opened my laptop and drafted a short announcement, now accepting students. Ballet instruction, tuition free. No mirrors. No pressure. Just joy. I attached a photo of the piano, the window light streaming in. Then I posted it. There was no marketing campaign. No strategy. Just truth. Out of habit, I checked my inbox. There it was, Isolde's PR statement, forwarded by a friend. It was as expected. Carefully worded. Emotionally distant. Something about learning through challenges and remaining committed to the values of empowerment and authenticity. I didn't bother reading the rest. Her brand had already lost 3 major sponsors. I hadn't lifted a finger. The next message was from my mother. Just a line of text, hope you're well. Maybe we can talk soon. I stared at it for a long time. There was no apology. No acknowledgement. Just a vague extension, wrapped in emotional neutrality. I didn't reply. Not out of spite, but because I wasn't ready to sit through another conversation that required me to translate my pain into something palatable. Instead, I closed my laptop and walked outside. The garden was bathed in soft morning light. Dew clung to the lavender bushes. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the laughter of children, the students from the local shelter I'd invited for the first class. They were waiting near the edge of the field, already stretching and giggling. One girl waved when she saw me. I waved back. I took off my shoes before stepping into the grass. The earth felt cool beneath my feet, grounding me, reminding me that I was still here. That all of this had happened, and yet, I was still whole. Maybe not untouched. But whole. Not everyone heals the same way. Some people shout. Some disappear. I had chosen stillness. And now, I was choosing movement. I reached the edge of the field, where the children stood in a semicircle. Are you ready to dance? I asked them, my voice steady. They nodded. And so we began. I didn't tell them about the ballroom. Or the spotlight. Or the stolen credits. I just moved with them. And in that moment, I knew, I didn't burn the bridge. I just chose not to walk back across it. Some wounds don't need to be shouted about, they just need to be seen. Tamsin's story reminds us that silence isn't weakness, sometimes, it's the most powerful response to years of dismissal and pain. When dignity is stripped in front of a crowd, it's the quiet rise afterward that leaves the deepest mark. Have you ever been pushed aside by your own family, only to come back stronger than they ever expected? If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of resilience, justice, and quiet revenge.